welcome to episode 59 of the Narrative Wargamer Podcast. I am Tony Rhodes, and tonight I'm joined by Dan.
Hello.
And for the first time in a while, Adam, Mr. ADR Wargaming, has returned to the show.
Hello. Good evening. It's great to be here. I don't know why I'm doing a very strange radio voice. No, that's not my voice. Hello. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you back, Adam. You have been a guest on the show before in the past, but it's fair to say that you're often kept quite busy with all the other things that you're up to in your own time as a content creator.
We've been trying to make this happen for a while. Well, I wish it was in my time as a content creator. It's mostly in my time as a gainfully employed gentleman. It's we've been trying to make this happen for a while, but it's really good to actually be able to get back and be here and talk about some bugs. Ultimately, I hope I haven't spoiled the lead there.
Oh no. I mean, it's fair to say that Dan in particular has been very excited and waited very patiently a long time for this episode, because not only is this our first faction on Crusade episode since 10th edition has launched, but it is going to be the long-awaited Tyranids on Crusade. That is tonight's topic. Dan, I'm sure, is very excited for it.
Yep. That's the noise that Tyranids make when they see a lot of biomass.
So yeah, Dan, I take it you've been waiting very patiently for this one. A whole edition ago was when we were originally planning to do this episode.
Yep. It's been a while. Been eagerly waiting in the void, watching from the shadow in the wall. Conveniently, the Crusade rules in this edition are very, very similar to the ones from 9th edition. So I can go over basically the same stuff that I would have been talking about anyway.
This has been prepped for ages. This is like going to be like when the presentation in school and you've had it prepped for weeks. Tony and I have just turned up. We've done no work, and Dan's just going to be like, right, here's a series of pie charts, graphs, and quotes that's going to just substantiate my argument. And we're just going to go, yeah, cool. Yeah, we agree with that.
In fairness, it's a good change from the usual thing of Tony has the book and reads it, and I just go, yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, this is one of the episodes tonight where I am going to be along for the ride, because I do not have and have not read the Tyranids Crusade rules. So it's going to be interesting to hear exactly what they get up to, especially in the context of the new 10th edition format for Crusade as well. But before we do jump into all that properly, should we give Adam a proper chance to introduce himself and tell us a little about what it is he does and the other things he gets up to?
Yes, that's very kind of you. Yes, I am Adam, aka ADR Wargaming. I'm called that pretty much everywhere. Instagram, for example, being the main one. What do I get up to? I do a bunch of things. I like to paint Warhammer. I like to play Warhammer. But I also am a host of a little fellow podcast called The Conclave 40K podcast. You can look us up. We're on Spotify and all other good reputable platforms, and probably some not so reputable ones, to be fair. We're just a bunch of us, sort of friends of mine here in London, and we just chat about Warhammer. I mean, there isn't much more to it than that, to be honest with you. We like playing with our little toy soldiers, and we like talking about it. We also like talking about other stuff as well. We talk about nerdy nonsense generally. We were chatting just before we started recording tonight about one of our friends, my friend War Hipster, who you can check out on YouTube as well. I'll give him a little plug if you want to learn how to be a bit of a wizard with contrast paint. He's on the podcast with us, and he normally has some interesting views on what's been going on in the week of sci-fi based television that we end up talking about. But we do primarily focus on Warhammer. And yeah, I when I get time, because I don't often get time, as you alluded to at the start of the podcast, I do like to play games and, just generally get out there and do a bit of narrative, bit of competitive, bit of everything, really. And obviously, since the start of 10th edition, I've been playing about with the Tyranids. I've been using my Space Marines as well, so I played against Tyranids, which is an interesting experience to be on the receiving end the power of the hive mind, as well as being able to sort of dole it out in large spoonfuls. So yeah, it's good. It's a good time right now, I think, to be a bug enthusiast, shall we say?
Yeah. I mean, how have you been finding them, Dan? I know you've also had a chance to sort of get your hands on some games with the new Tyranids.
Yeah, it's fun. They're good, but not really, really strong, sort of like they were when the last Codex came out, and it was ridiculously oppressive, and you just felt kind of a bit dirty playing them.
Yes, yeah.
Now they're sort of like safely in the middle, it feels, which is where everyone should be, really.
I mean, yeah, they're definitely like a not mid-tier makes them sound a bit rubbish, and they're not. They're really good fun to play with. I think there's loads of depth in the book. We'll talk about it more as we go through the podcast, but they're definitely not broken, right? In the way that I think some armies, let's be blunt about it, for 10th edition are a bit broken, and post-nerf are still a bit broken. Eldar, sorry, but you know, it is what it is. It's the way the game evolves, right? But no, I think Tyranids offer, and I think a lot of people have got them now as well that didn't have them before from the Leviathan box. Bought that and got into 40k, or just bought the box to expand their armies, and therefore Tyranids, it's a good time to be playing with them. I think they're good fun, really, overall.
Yeah, there's always a nice period when new models come out and you see lots of people painting them on the Instagrams and Twitter and stuff, but especially when new Tyranids come out, because they always look great in like every scheme.
And you know what, we should say as well, Tony, sorry to jump in with another plug, but it's not a plug for me, kind of a plug for me, but it's also a plug for Dan, because listeners of the Narrative Wargamer Podcast, if you are a Tyranid person, and if you have painted your Tyranids using any shade of orange, and you want to join the hashtag Orange Carapace gang, which Dan and I are proudly members of, then get it on the Instagram, tag us, hashtag it, and we can all join together and turn Space Marines into soup, or whatever it is we do for fun.
Orange soup.
Or ultimately it will become chitin. So yeah, orange soup is fine. Carrot soup, sort of slightly off tomato soup. Whatever you want to do.
And any Space Marine players that happen to have Space Marines painted in orange armor should watch out.
yeah, because we'll just think you look particularly tasty because we like orange. So
Also, bonus points for correct pronunciation of chitin.
Oh, thank you. Not chitin.
Yeah, that's one that Dan will never lets me slip up on. He always makes sure that I always get it the right way around.
Yes,
but yeah, so like we know the Tyranids have been the first sort of army to get their codex in the 10th edition environment, and the first ones to have the option to experiment around with multiple detachments. I don't know, have you had a chance to sort of delve into that at all, or try a couple out?
No. In short.
Yeah, unfortunately, Dan, I know why that is the case. That's because currently the majority of all your Tyranids are sat in my living room, and you've just had the contents of the Leviathan box.
I have precisely the Leviathan box and one Norn emissary.
It's a good start. I've actually only played a game with Invasion Fleet. A couple of games actually with Invasion Fleet, because obviously Index Hammer was a thing. I've built a list with the Vanguard Onslaught as well, and sort of played around with the idea of taking that. I haven't had a chance to run it on the table yet, so I would like to actually get that going at some point, because I'm in a couple of, again, don't get a chance to play very often, but when I do, I'm in a couple of sort of campaigns with friends of mine in different gaming groups in London, including guys from podcast actually. So one of those I'm playing. I decided to literally I was like, I'll just do the two armies that I've sort of been building out of the box. So one of them I'm Space Marines, and in the other one I'm Tyranids. So in the Tyranid one, I will end up using at some point Vanguard Invader. But I think the options are really good, right? I mean, I don't know, Dan, you sort of had a chance to do some theory crafting, but like I think all of them apart from maybe Crusher Stampede, which is probably suffering from the existence of Crusher Stampede. And I say this, I hold my hands up as someone who took Crusher Stampede to a team tournament as well, many eons ago when it became a thing. So I'm guilty of being that guy. But yeah, I think it's suffered a bit from what Crusher Stampede was before. And it's come, it's been hit hard, shall we say. Still usable, still cool, still good fun if you like big bugs. But from like the whole, let's be all optimized and competitive point of view, probably not the best one. But they are all still fun, I would say. And if you're playing a fun game and you want to use your big bugs, take your Crusher Stampede. Go for it, man.
Yeah.
It's still good.
Yeah, I definitely want to try all of them at some point. They all seem fun and flavorful.
I have heard that like none of them seem bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, none of them are bad.
None of them seem really, really good either, which is nice. Like the default is still one of the best ones.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and I think it really does, because Tyranids are, and again we'll talk about this more, I guess, but Tyranids are such a diverse army in terms of like how you can build them. Like if you want to run 160 Gaunt/Gant/ gargoyles, right? If you want to do your big swarm, you can, and there is a detachment for you. There is literally an unending swarm detachment, right? So they really leaned into like all those different ways to play them, which is really nice, because then depending on what your collection looks like, you can mix and match them. You can try different things, which is the mark of a good book, I think. If this is how codexes are going to be going forward, and I said this on the Conclave, I think if this is how codexes is going to be going forward and detachments are going to look, I think that's great. It's a really good sign.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also quite nice that the data sheets haven't changed very much from the index versions.
Yeah,
some nice continuity.
Yeah, so some of them, some of them did change in quite interesting ways. So shed a tear for Tyrannofex, for those of you who know what that means. But yeah, they every Tyranid player loves a Tyrannofex, right? So you say what happened to the Tyrannofex, everyone just goes, yeah, pretty sad times. But no, they have largely stayed the same, or gotten like interesting different side grades, I would say. So yeah, really, really good overall in terms of transition from the index.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I mean, it sounds like for the first Codex of 10th edition, it sounds like there seems to have been a good handle on essentially Codex creep. The whole Codex versus Index scenario, and not being huge changes on the data cards really is probably a big contributor to that. If the majority of units and the majority of armies are going to look like they currently do when their codexes land, then you're not going to get as big a disparity as there might have been in 8th edition when some armies went from their index to their codex.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know about halfway through that cycle, there was a point where basically most people avoided playing codex versus index games because the disparity was enough to sort of feel it in the games. So you'd end up with like the 12 people who had their codexes playing with the 12 armies that had their codexes playing against each other, and the 12 armies that didn't play against each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of that is a function of the way that they've gone about, like just in 10th edition generally, the way that they've gone about designing the detachments for the index, and for codexes, which is you're not doing what you did in 8th edition and 9th edition, which is where you're just layering rules on rules on rules on rules. So you're like, I mean, I remember like back in the days of Crusher Stampede, right? Like Crusher Stampede, I had, what was the full list of things I had to take with me? Because I remember when I went to this damn team tournament, I basically was bringing like the British Library in a bag, because I had the Tyranid Codex, I had a supplement, and then I had a white dwarf on top of that. Because it was like you could run the Leviathan supplement and you could run Crusher Stampede at the same time, and then obviously they then got rid of that as well, which was, to be fair, was a very good thing, because that was broken as all hell. But the system now where it's just pick a detachment, you get 6 enhancements for your army. You get, or however many it is, I think it's 6 off the top of my head, or 4. You get, 6 stratagems that you can play with, some of which are shared across the detachments, others of which are completely unique. And that's it, right? And that's what you work with. And you're not you get your army rule, whatever one you run, and you're not layering on top of that, like, oh, I've got access to this thing, and then I've got access to that thing, where there's someone sitting over there with an index going, I've got a potato. So it just creates a really unfair game. So it's definitely a better system. And I know people were a bit skeptical about bits of this, but having played a few games with it actually works quite well, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the impressions I get of it is that, as Dan's alluded to already, is that, say in a codex like this one where you've got 6 different detachments, that gives someone 6 games to play before they even have to necessarily play with a duplicate detachment or settle on which one they enjoyed the most for their collection. And actually, for a lot of players, 6 games of 40k with that one faction as well is probably going to last them like a month, a couple of months or two, like 2 or 3 months, depending on the player, before they're necessarily recycling or, settling on which one is definitely, this is the way I want to run my army. And they don't even have to do that. Like, you could settle on 2 of them that like work well for their collection, and they can switch and change it up from week to week at the game club if they want. Yeah,
definitely. And I think also, as well, the other thing to say about it is for people who... Oh, no, sorry, go on, Dan. I've chatted away for too long. Go on,
I was going to say bonus points for the fact that the detachments aren't sub-faction locked. So if you're someone who has painted an army in a specific colour and you are stubborn and refuse to play it as not that colour, you can now play it as any of the detachments.
Yes, I mean, of all the armies, Tyranids were probably the one which the majority of people either would not care or even know necessarily which paint schemes were which hive fleets. But I have to say for myself, Dan, I certainly would have been someone who would have been self-imposing it on myself if I had a collection painted in a particular scheme, because I do know and recognise the majority of the paint schemes feature the hive fleets. I would not expect anyone else to necessarily be beholden to them. But it's that weird thing, isn't it, where it's like, well, those are clearly painted as hive fleet Kraken, and I know that. Yeah, but you're using as Leviathan rules.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can always tell, because you had the people who had 8th edition Kraken that then became 9th edition Leviathan, that's now, helpfully, anything you want, right? So it was always funny. There were a lot of Kraken Leviathan hive fleets knocking around in 9th edition. I remember that.
They're always busy fighting with the suspiciously slightly grey-blue painted Ultramarines / Space Wolves / Dark Angels / whatever chapter they needed to be Space Marines.
Yeah. No, it's true. But what I was going to say on top of that, as sort of a build out to what Dan was saying there, I think the other nice bonus is, if you're listening and you've not looked at a Tyranid Codex, or you don't know anyone who's got one, if you can get a flick through it from a friend or whatever, it's worth looking at just to get a feel for how Codex is potentially as the model going forward. But the other thing to note is, right, that you're not the detachments aren't, and it's something that the detachments aren't restricted by models either, right? So one thing I thought certainly we talked about, like among my group of people I play with, was we sort of all assumed or had a feeling that what they might do is when they do their flavoured detachments, whatever they are, there would be like restrictions. So it would be like, if you're running, let's say Crusher Stampede, okay, well, you can't actually take Hormagaunts and, Termagants and Gargoyles because it's a big bug army, so you just can't take them. That's not how they've done it. They've actually done it as, no, you can still use any of the units. It's just that the detachments do certain things to keywords, right? To certain keywords which certain units have, and that makes them, a bit better in that detachment, or they do additional things. So that's the other interesting one with those, with the units in the book, and why it gives like a whole nother level of play for a Tyranid enthusiast is you might have a unit which you've sat there and you've again, sorry, and I apologize. I'm on the Narrative Wargaming Podcast, and I'm being a bit like compy
it's
optimization
fine,
about
don't
this,
worry.
right? But like you might sit
we
there and you
enjoy
might go,
poking fun at it, so it's all fair game.
it's legitimate. But you might sit there and you might go, oh, do you know what? Gene Stealers, oh, they're a bit pricey when I look at my list. Oh, I can't fit some Gene Stealers in. And then you look at the Vanguard Onslaught detachment where they've got the Vanguard Invader keyword, so they get additional benefits, and you go, oh, suddenly, do you know what? They're actually really worth it in that. So I'm going to take them. So it encourages you to not be like to kind of go back on a little bit of what I said there and sort of to lightly mock the competitive optimization world. I think those tier lists that everyone does, where they do those tier lists where they're like, this unit is the best unit and this unit is the worst unit because reasons, right? Those are and to be fair, the people who do them, that I've seen do them, other content creators have said this, so fair play to them, or the good ones have, is they're actually a lot harder now, because it's really, there's so many more ways that like units in the Tyranid Codex can work. It's really difficult to go, nah, this one's actually just bad, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a few that fall into that category, but overall, it's like, oh, actually...
Like, how good is a Gene Stealer? Well, the question is, what detachment is it in?
Yeah, and also, what are you giving it? Are you putting a Broodlord in there? Can you attach things to it? Right? It's like it just means it's a lot more. The whole thing is a lot more fluid, which actually I think, for all to think about your comment about like armies painted as armies or whatever, and sort of people talk about removing the flavor a little bit, right? Because one of the I think the arguments given against the way they've done it with the you can paint it however you want rule is that people said, oh, well, hang on a second, that's taking away some of the flavour of the fluff behind the codex. It's like, but actually, it's not, because now you can do so many combinations and so many things, and make stuff do the thing that it does in the fluff, in the narrative, in a given detachment. If you want to, it actually lets you be a lot more creative, right? Lets you be a lot more creative.
It does, and I think that's great. In the sense that, people can do whatever they want. Like, I've been locked into Death Skulls since they introduced sub-factions back in 8th edition.
Nice.
Now, that has come and gone with its various bonuses over the years. I still really enjoyed my 6-up invuln throughout 8th edition on just everything, and I do really enjoy the fact that Ramshackle in the new 10th ed of Orcs is just 6-up invuln on all the Orc vehicles. It feels like I'm halfway back to being a Death Skull again. But I like the fact that when their Codex rolls around, if I want, I'll have the options of doing a Speed War and not feeling like I'm missing out on some of the benefits because I'm not playing as Evil Sons. Like, my Speed War will be just as legitimate as an Evil Sons one.
Yeah, exactly. I can do a shooty list, don't we, just as valid as a Bad Moons one, and so on.
Yeah.
So that is great. But to return to our poking fun concept at some of the dissonance that you can get sometimes when it comes to the freedom that's now been unlocked by this new method with army lists. Essentially, what you're now looking at is 3 components. You're looking at models that you physically can take, the paint scheme in which they are painted in, and the detachment in which they are pulling the rules from. And the most wide-ranging flexibility we have of this at the moment is the Space Marines, because they kind of have multiple detachments already via the larger sub-factions, things like the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves.
Sure.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And now, Space Marine players, feel free to correct me if I get this wrong or my understanding isn't clear, because I'm not a Space Marine player, so I have not in-depthly read the rules, but obviously, a lot of those chapters and factions have unique units. The Dark Angels have the things like the Raven Wing and the Deathwing Knights. The Blood Angels have things like Sanguinary Guard and Death Company. And I'm not 100% clear on how those are and aren't faction locked. You can't have Sanguinary Guard in your Space Wolf army, for example.
Yeah.
Now, I assume the logic behind that is because you have the Blood Angels keyword as your chapter word, and those Blood Angel unique units can only be taken in a chapter that has the Blood Angel keyword as its chosen keyword.
So I I can answer that for you, Tony. You're 100% right. So there is a bit in the index for the generic Space Marines called Space Marine chapters under the army rule, and what it says is if your Adeptus Astartes unit has a second faction keyword, like e.g. Ultramarines, e.g. Raven Guard, thinking about emo fella stood on a wall, what's his name, Shrike. That is therefore the whatever it is chapter, Ultramarines chapter, Raven Guard chapter, Blood Angels, blah 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 blah. You cannot include units from more than one chapter in your army. So you can run a Space Marine army with Guilliman, but you can't run a Space Marine army with Guilliman and the Lion, and Dante and I don't know, Niall Stormcaller, right? So it is set up to sort of force you to pick one, basically.
Yep. Now, conversely, I do know that you are allowed to, for example, have your Blood Angel chapter army, and you can choose to use the Gladius Strike Force detachment.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't have to use the Blood Angel one. Now, my question is, can you do the reverse as being true or not? So could you have an Ultramarines army that contains only Ultramarine characters and units and use what is currently the Blood Angels detachment rules? That is my question.
Do you know what? I'm going to do it live. I'm going to have a look at the index because So what you could do, you couldn't take, because it says again in the, I'm just looking at the Blood Angels Sons of Sanguinius detachment, because Blood Angels and my glorious Space Jesus Hawk boy. Oh, Sanguinius, how I love you. It says you can include Blood Angels units, but it cannot include any Adeptus Astartes units drawn from any other chapter. So again, you could take your blue Ultramarine, I don't know, aggressors, and you could say, for the purposes of this, I am running a Sons of Sanguinius detachment. For the purposes of that, these aggressors are Blood Angels aggressors. But you couldn't take Marnius Calgar and go, Marnius Calgar is a Blood Angel in the Sons of Sanguinius detachment.
Yeah, so
your unique units get cut out that way.
Yeah, so you could have a collection of Codex compliant Ultramarines, no special characters, no otherwise Ultramarine unique units, and you could play them using the Sons of Sanguinius detachment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely you could. Yeah.
So basically, you have Ultramarines that get +1 to charge and wound and stuff like that, and the bonuses the Blood Angels have.
But I guess the flip side of that is they will lose out on the Gladius. Force, whatever it's called now. They'll end up with a load of stratagems and stuff that are sort of like, does this work for you? I mean, you can do it.
The stratagems they would have access to would be the ones from the Sons of Sanguinius detachment.
Yes, yeah,
that's where your stratagems are drawn from.
Yes,
unless any of those stratagems are keyworded to things like Sanguinary Guard or Death Company.
No, so they are all Adeptus Astartes, but what I mean is because they're sort of designed for, like, for example, the one, and again, I don't know if you've looked through the Blood Angels. This is becoming like a very generic 10th edition podcast. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen.
It's not like, I'm going somewhere with it. I've got.
Okay.
An entertaining point.
Okay. I'll keep going. So for example, the one stratagem that's like really good in the Blood Angel one is Angel Sacrifice, which is basically you can get an Adeptus Astartes character that was just destroyed, and until the end of the battle, each time a friendly Adeptus Astartes unit makes an attack and targets the enemy unit that destroyed the character, you can re-roll the hit roll. That's generically powerful, but like it's clearly kind of meant to lean towards like the whole Blood Angel sacrificial thingy from a fluff perspective. So or Red Rampage as well. That's pretty good. I guess that is pretty universal.
But then again, like you can have characters for from the Ultramarines, for example, who are also very protective of the people, and has been quite a self-sacrificey style character. I'm sure there's been moments in plenty of Black Library novels where your Ventress has thrown himself in the way of something to protect his brothers.
So you're saying you can run the Blood Angels detachment as Ultramarines, but if you use that stratagem, you have to call it Blue Rampage.
Kind of.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, to my third point then, is there anything that includes the rules anywhere for prohibited units? And the primary example I'm thinking of is, does it anywhere in the Black Templars detachment rules, so the super devout Space Marines, does it say presumably you can't take librarians?
Do you know? I haven't even looked at that, so let's have it. Oh, so interesting. So, restrictions on Black Templars. Your army cannot include any Adeptus Astartes Psycho models, and cannot include any of the following models that do not have the Black Templars keyword: Gladiator Lancer, Gladiator Reaper, Gladiator Valiant, Impulsor, Repulsor, Executioner. Which is quite interesting.
It's because they have their own ones that have multi-melters, right?
So here's my thinking.
Yes, yeah. See, I guess short of modelling that on them, there's no.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing they've got their own data cards because they'll have different weapon options. The only difference being that they can take a multi-melter.
Melters, yeah.
So here's my question about whether or not this is legal as an army list build. And the reason why I just think this is funny is because if you've got someone who comes to the game and they know nothing about the lore, nothing about the background, they just see some artwork and go, that's the way I want to paint my Space Marines. And what's the most competitive way to play them? And if at the time, by some coincidence, this was the way to do it, would this be legal? And that is, you have a player who has a collection built and painted as Black Templars.
Mm-hmm.
They're not using any of the Black Templar specific units. So not using Sword Brethren, they're not using Crusader squads or whatever. They choose to use the detachment rules for Space Wolves because they think sagas are the most competitive choice to play around with.
Yeah.
And as such, because they're playing with the Sons of Rus or whatever detachment, they have no prohibition on taking psychic units. And therefore, they take a Black Templar's librarian who's going around trying to complete his saga.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it.
In theory, that's allowed.
Yeah.
Because the free components that are the actual painted models, your paint scheme, and then the unit choices that you can and cannot take, and then the detachment rules that you're using are free siloed pieces of information in the majority of cases.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely, no, definitely. You could do that if you wanted to. Although, again, if you're painting Black Templars and you've got a librarian, then the Inquisition will be coming to see you shortly.
Exactly.
It's so the three people who played Black Templars after the 3rd edition box set came out, but before they had rules and lore, who will have built their own librarians because they didn't have anything saying they couldn't back then. They can finally use them again.
But yeah, it's one of these things where I know there'd be some part of me that just if I saw at a top table, like the LVO or whatever, and there's Black Templar librarians are crushing it because their rules are broken when combined with Space Wolf sagas or some equivalent. It'd just be like, it's just funny to me that technically that can work as the way the indexes currently are laid out. That's legal to do. And you're right, that's not how wargamers and hobbyists think. So that's not typically how you would get there. But it feels the closest. The closest recent dissonance to that was when at the tail end of Ninth, you had the Emperor's Children's army that were all being reinforced by Zinch Flamers.
Oh yeah, that one that one annoyed me. That did. I don't get on my high horse about these things that often, but that one I was like, nah, come on. Because to be fair, with that one, that was a very, and I say this as somebody who is a lawyer, right? So I'm going to be rude about my own profession. Most people are anyway. Is that was a very rules lawyery reading to be able to have that happen. I would say what you've said tonight is not at all. I mean, it's just the way it works, right? It's very free flowing. That was a very, in my mind, a very egregious oh well, actually we can do this, and it's yeah, but you can't though. Come on.
Yeah. The reason why I understood that in simple terms why it worked, but also then it's this prime example of the cognitive dissonance of a hobbyist knowing the lore and the universe and the setting and the armies and all the rest of it just feeling off, and why would that ever be the case? It just doesn't. It feels like it shouldn't be a thing, despite the fact in principle it's quite simple. And the reason for it was simply because at the time of the 4 major god legions, your World Eaters, Death Guard, and Thousand Sons exist as a separate entity with their own codexes and rules. So ultimately the Emperor's Children, all they were behaving as was one of the sub-faction choices of generic Chaos Space Marines. And generic Chaos Space Marines were not god-locked in any way. So, as written, an Emperor's Children force was no different to a Night Lord's force or an Iron Warrior's force. They were just a flavour of Chaos Space Marine. So, which is why on paper it worked, why you could just bring in, therefore, any demons to work with them. But we all know that they are Slaanesh devoted. Like, they shouldn't have anything other than Slaanesh.
That is rubbish, and you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say on the and again, this is we've gone well away from Tyranids, but on the Space Marines, what I would say is the thing that it says to me is that if you are a if you are a Space Marine player, right, and if you really love playing like one of the if you love playing one of the kind of non-Codex compliant chapters, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Blood Angels, it's relatively straightforward because at the very least you do have your own detachment that's named for you. If you are playing as, I don't know, Raven Guard or Imperial Fists or, Iron Hands or something like that, then you've got the Gladius Strike Force, but actually it's very free-flowing. What it says to me is actually almost you are, and I to be fair, I've done this, so I'm biased, but it's like paint your own scheme, do a successor chapter, right? Do what sort of you want to do, because then actually you can play it as anything, right? If that's the kind of flex you want. And it's nice that they've reflected that in the rules almost now, but you will still get people who'll be like, and again, in some cases fairly, like, it's a Black Templars army, I'm running it as Black Templars, but I've got a librarian, or I'm running it as Ultramarines, but I've got a librarian. Don't do that. But like everywhere else, you can be quite flexible, and you can just like flex into trying out different things rather than being stuck on a specific play style. Or in the case of 9th edition, and Quipster had his Imperial Fist army, bless him, he still got it, still going with it, but its rules were a bit I'm really good against fortifications. Cool, nobody has any fortifications. Oh, great, cool.
I mean, funny. I did always find it funny how 8th edition led to this phenomena amongst YouTubers in particular to create all custom factions for everything, because it meant that they were not faction locked to their rules when showcasing them on their channels, and that's where things like the 13th showed up on Winters, and the Obsidian Dragon showed up on Tabletop Tactics, and so on. But now, anything can be anything, and that's not a necessity. Yeah. But also, at the same time, those same factions are free to do whatever they want and be whatever they want, and it's great.
Yep, absolutely.
But speaking of factions doing what they do, perhaps we should tangentially pull this back towards Tyranids.
Back to Tyranids, yeah.
Right.
So, this is where it's Dan's time to shine. So, it's just worth mentioning that obviously we've not as yet done an in-depth episode or anything on Crusade as a whole in 10th edition. And funnily enough, one of the reasons for that is because fundamentally it hasn't really changed, which is a good thing.
It's very similar.
Core concepts of how you build an order of battle and then pick armies for your games, and they earn experience points to earn battle honors and can suffer battle scars. That's all the same. Obviously, there's new updated things for like the battle scars and battle honors and options, and some of the language has been updated to reflect that the game is now played with points instead of power level, even though it's very much a power level adjacent system, and we love it. The fact that we don't specifically have warlord traits, relics anymore, so instead the language talks about taking enhancements on your heroes and so on. So it's the requisition point system is still there, and that's how you upgrade and enhance and expand your Crusade force. So I'm sure we will perhaps touch on this more in future episodes as well, but the concept of Crusade remains core to what it was in 9th edition, and we love that about it. And in particular, Dan's probably going to launch off now on his long-awaited presentation about Tyranid on Crusade rules, because similarly, they've not massively changed from their 9th edition iteration, and that is encouraging, because hopefully that means that a lot of the things we saw in 9th edition for all the factions will potentially be returning in some shape or form.
Yeah. Just to briefly go back to Space Marines, I guess it'd be interesting to see what comes out for Crusade in their book, because they were the first, and it was pretty
Will they
plain,
actually
wasn't
have
it?
something this time?
Yeah, it'd be nice to get something
Yeah.
for them that is a bit more interesting than just you can have a guy turn into a dreadnought.
Ooh. And then down the line, here's some pretty flag upgrades for your pretty flag.
Yeah.
And that's in
Cool.
White Dwarf or whatever it was. I think it was one of the Warzone books. They added that.
So it's relevant to what I will be talking about, that I think you can probably boil down the core changes of the Crusade rules to they've tried to tone down the sort of massive power creep you get when you have loads of experience points. There's a lot of little changes that mean you can't kind of like scale up your force as quickly. You need to pay for a requisition to get normal units to get higher than like 2 level ups. When you get a battle scar, you instead of just sort of losing some XP, you would lose a whole like level up. And there's the new system where you get, I can't remember what they call off the top of my head, but you get sort of bonus rules if you're playing uphill rather than just getting extra command points. So there's a lot of stuff that make this, they've tried to make it to so that uneven levels of experience in the Crusade system aren't just like an insurmountable odds. That becomes relevant because the sort of the Tyranid faction rules in 9th edition were kind of built in a slightly different way to all the others, and they kind of encourage you to sort of cycle through units a bit so that you wouldn't just like use the same few units and level them up like to the max rank and that's it. It encouraged you to swap out units for different ones in the book at different stages of the invasion, stuff like that. And obviously that has carried on into this book, but it's slightly less kind of relevant now than it used to be in terms of making it play differently to a normal Crusade force, I think. If that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, no, it does.
So, yeah, with that sort of caveat in mind, let's talk about Tyranids. Looking at my lovely book here, the at the start of the Crusade section, there is the important sort of key core mechanic of it, the Devouring Worlds section. In here, essentially, you randomly generate a world, be it an industrial world, a rural world, or a hive world, and then you work out how much biomass you can gather from that world and how long it takes in terms of battles played to do so. And as you progress through this invasion of devouring a world, you go through 3 stages. You go through the invasion stage, the predation stage, and the consumption stage. And each of these stages requires a certain amount of battles played and a certain amount of biomass to get to the next stage. And each of the stages has a different set of special rules that can apply to your force while you're in that stage, which we'll get to shortly. And the kind of like the key point of it is once you have progressed through the 3 stages, you've devoured the world and you get a massive load of biomass points that you can spend on loads of upgrades. So you get this big sort of boost to your Crusade force where everything, you can get loads of extra experience, spend loads of points upgrading various things, or just buy a whole load more points into your order of battle. And part of why that's important is that the Tyranids, when they spend the requisition to get more points, it costs them double. So the intent is that you don't do that until you've devoured a world, and then you get all the points from that instead.
That's interesting. So actually they're putting a restriction on like the core mechanic of Crusade.
Yes.
Because the way the factions rules basically take it in a different direction to approach that particular aspect. A bit like the old micromanaging spreadsheet degrees that the Chaos Lords needed to be able to run their crusades.
Yeah. It's probably worth noting that this section is a little bit simpler than it used to be in the 9th edition bit. It's kind of like 10th edition. They've kind of rounded off the dodgy edges and made it a little bit more straightforward. So it's pretty clear what you need to do to play through this. As an example, if you're trying to devour an industrial world, in the invasion step you need to play 2d3 battles and accumulate 3 points of biomass to get to the next step. Once you get to the next step, you need to play a further 4 battles and accumulate d3 points of biomass to get to the next step, and then 5 battles, 3 biomass. So the whole cycle is 10, 12 games, something like that. So I think probably for most people, your entire campaign would be devouring one world, unless you're playing a lot.
Like I say, that sounds about right. Like if you're having a full length campaign and you play somewhere in the region of 8 to 12 games in that time, you could imagine I imagine this would actually be a really fun mechanic to use against one other specific opponent. Like if you've got a regular person that you play with and they have their own Crusade rules at some point, so perhaps Space Marines in the near future. It'd be interesting to actually see how their Crusade force plays in what is also kind of a bit of a predetermined storyline, where the idea is that like the Tyranids are going to win this war on this world. They will consume it by the end of the campaign, but how does the other player survive and what do they achieve of note in the meantime is an interesting sort of self emergent story.
Play like 10 games against one person, devour their world, then throw them out and play someone else for 10 games.
You could have the player actually be like, this is my chapter homeworld, and by the end of this campaign we're going to be fleet based.
You have turned into the sides of the Emperor, and we are going to strip your world of everything.
The sides of the Emperor. I've got bad news for you.
You could do it against an Eldar army and do the fall of Crafto Diandon. So you start with a Crusade force where it's all like no wraiths and like all living Eldar, and then by the end of the campaign, the Eldar army is mostly wraith constructs.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You can take them to the end of the campaign. You can as once you've devoured their world, you can take them to Warhammer World in Nottingham, and you can show them the Doom of Iandan diorama and laugh heartily as they weep little Eldar tears. Don't do that.
Do that because it's really cool there.
Yeah, no, I mean, do go to Warhammer World and do check out the dioramas. They are generally cool. Just maybe don't drag your poor friend who you've just beaten into the dust over 10 games to come and see the Doom of Iandan.
Yeah, so just to finish up this section, it's worth saying how you get the biomass points. Essentially, you get one every time you win, you lose one every time you lose, and then you can gather more through the agendas, which kind of in line with the sort of thing we were seeing in 9th edition, where the faction-specific agendas give you bonus to the faction resource.
Yeah. So, I'm guessing things like pick a particular enemy unit and kill it for bio points, or pick a particular objective, and if you hold it, get bio points.
In fact, let's skip to the agendas now. That makes sense. They are actually very similar to the 9th edition ones again. Similar sort of thing, but just tidied up a bit. There's 4, and notably because in in 10th edition, there aren't agenda categories anymore. You just pick 2 agendas, I believe. So you could pick 2 from the Tyranid section.
Oh, really?
Which is
that is
nice.
a change that I wasn't. Yeah, that is a change I wasn't aware of.
Yeah,
so that is nice.
In fact,
it.
technically, you could. I figured out you could pick all 4 if you spend some requisition points, because you could. There's a requisition that gives you an additional agenda that has to be a Tyranid one, and one of the sort of underdog bonuses for being behind on Crusade points is to pick an additional agenda. So you could have all 4 Tyranid agendas going at once.
I like
nice.
it. I must say to in between Dan's quite a serious and sober overview of these, which is obviously one thing I quite like about this. Just to be very flippant for a second, is that the sort of little lore nuggets that they give you for each of the the requisitions, the agendas, etc. You can't, because they're all obviously from the perspective of the Tyranids, right? Which is something we don't normally see, right? Because the lore in the rest of this codex, which is really good, by the way, is obviously all told from the perspective of people who've come across the swarm. So it's all really depressing because it's all about the inevitability of being turned into goulash. But these ones, because they're told from the perspective of the Tyranids, you can read the Crusade ones in the style of David Attenborough and be very happy with yourself. So for example, right? So for example, we've got one here, Infest the Prey World is one of the agendas, right? It's the first agenda, and you can literally just go, in order to overwhelm the prey, devour the biomass of the dead, and seed the world with toxic spores, the swarm must cover all. So you can kind of just read it to yourself like a nice nature documentary.
Yeah, lovely. Aren't
That's
Tyranids
hilarious.
beautiful?
Sorry, that was very flippant of me.
I like it. It's just, I did see something. A friend sent me some like YouTube videos the other week about basically exactly that. I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of the channel was now. Unfortunately, I'm going to see if I can find it and put it in the description below. But basically, it was like a 40k lore channel where it's all about the creatures and animals of the universe and the species of the universe. It's all like David Attenborough like voiceovers for it all. And like this was an episode about Katchan, so it was talking about the Katchan devils and the barking toads and the face huggers and so on.
Love it.
Nice.
But yeah, I'll leave a link below if I can find it again, because that was exactly that, and it's brilliant. But yeah, just to cycle back then, in case it wasn't obvious or clear from that, to anyone who isn't familiar with Crusade rules, the agendas are basically the equivalent of like your secondary or tactical objectives when playing a game of Crusade, because traditionally Crusade missions do not include sort of secondaries or tactical objectives to achieve. They just have their primary scoring. And then the idea is that second level of tactical objectives is achieved by your agendas, and they reward you with stuff that usually is benefits your Crusade as a whole that lasts outside the confines of that particular game, be it more resources or upgrades or whatever it might be.
The key thing about the agendas is that they don't actually impact winning the game at all. So your opponent doesn't really have any reason to stop you achieving them, which is quite cool. So the Tyranid ones we've got here,
it gives you something to do if you are falling behind on the scoring.
Yes.
It's starting to feel like it's an unwinnable game,
Absolutely.
but there's something you can achieve out of it.
I think that's the kind of the key strength of the Crusade system, is that it's worth fighting in a losing cause.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, the 4 Tyranid agendas, very quickly. Infest the Prey World, which we had the lore text read so eloquently just now, is essentially you get biomass points for Endless Multitude units. That's Termagants, Hormagaunts, Gargoyles, and now Neurogaunts, I believe. You get points for them being in table quarters, and you get XP for them being behind deployment zones, in the enemy deployment zone. So basically just spread all over the board with your little bugs. There's Hunt and Slay, which is just kill stuff. Basically your opponent picks 5 units in their army, and you get XP and biomass points for killing them in melee. There's Tyranniform the Prey World, which is about placing markers on the board, essentially doing old style actions. Your infantry units do the action, inverted commas, and you get points. And finally, the last agenda is Tyranid Attack, which is basically kill everything. You get loads of XP and biomass points if you kill everything. Simple.
Oh yes, I do remember that being. Yeah, I do remember that being one of the agendas. I think it might have been in one of the Warzone books for Tyranids. That was basically if you table the opponent, get like a ton of resources.
I like that though. That is nice and like it's good. They are really leaning into that thematic. That what the Tyranids do, because that's the thing. They just you're just food, right? Oh, you're in armor. You're tinned food. And that's it. At the end of the day, there's no. It's part of the appeal of playing them. There's no good or evil here. They're just hungry.
The Tyranids are essentially just a very well evolved can opener.
I'm sitting here looking at a Carnifex that I've been playing about with, that I've got magnetized, and I'm doing the crushing claws. And so that was a very appropriate comment because it does look like I should just pop a can or a bottle open with him.
Yep.
So we've got the faction resource, we've got the agendas, we've got the overall goal throughout the sort of the campaign.
Yep.
Moving through these stages to stages. So what do each of these actual stages of invasion mechanically do then in the game then?
Here's the bit where I am a little bit sad. Because I think this is the bit where it falls down a bit, if I'm honest. It's a little bit disappointing. The 9th edition bit was better here. I think they've... I don't think they've quite got this right. But there's there starts with the invasion stage, and you get... So each of them has a special requisition you can use, and like a caveat to get special extra XP for certain units. So the Vanguard one in the invasion section allows you to swap 2 Vanguard Invader units in your order of battle, swap the battle traits from them. So if you've got a really experienced unit of Gene Sealers and a really experienced Lictor, and you want to swap the traits around, you can do that with a requisition, which is like okay, but I don't know. It's a bit niche, if you know what I mean. I can't see myself using it.
Interesting, but yeah.
And then you get extra experience points for the following units if they end the battle wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. You get it for Endless Multitude units, Vanguard Invader units, and your Warlord. That all makes sense. You get XP for being behind enemy lines, basically. I guess if you're in the Vanguard's invasion stage, you're running loads of Gene Sealers, they're gonna... If you do well, they're going to end up behind enemy lines. You get extra XP. Makes sense. That works.
Yeah. There's worth saying. There are the other nice thing about this is, although those are keyword locked, there are quite that covers quite a few units. In the book, because there are like a lot of units that have Vanguard Invader keyword is quite widely shared. So it is your Gene Stealers, but it's also like your Winged Hive Tyrant or your what else is there? Winged Prime. Basically anything that's like fast or anything sneaky. So Neurolictors, Death Leaper has it. So if you want to do something cool narrative like the Death Leaper's in, because it can infiltrate, it's behind enemy lines at the end of the battle, as it rightly should be. You're going to get your extra XP, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
And I suppose at this stage as well, that's then like promoting 2 of the 6 detachments to be sort of like the ones to narratively use at this stage of the invasion. Because
absolutely,
if you're trying to achieve these objectives with Vanguard or Multitude units, then if you want to be playing into that in your army build, you want to be playing into the Vanguard or Multitudes detachments.
Probably worth a little note here that in the 10th edition Crusade rules, you don't have to pick a sub-faction. When you build the list, you decide which detachment you're using. So you can have your order of battle playing as multiple different detachments through the Crusade, which is really cool, but it does have the weird effect that you can have enhancements from multiple different detachments in your army, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'd heard this. Talked about on the Masters of the Forge podcast, because they were talking a little bit about their experience playing some Crusade games, and the way that upgrading your characters of equipment now works is that you pick an enhancement for them, and then that character has that enhancement indefinitely, regardless of what detachment he's then included in future.
Yeah.
And the way, so it does mean that you can end up with an enhancement from the Vanguard detachment on a character who is then, you're playing that game with an Endless Multitudes detachment army, but that character still retains his Vanguard enhancement.
And I was going to say, I'll say now, again, putting my little competitive dunce hat on, right, on the wrong podcast. That's quite spicy, because there are certain enhancements in certain detachments in the Tyranid Codex in particular that are very good, and there are other ones which are perhaps not so good. So you could get some, to take an example out of this, right? If you were doing Estonia, as you say, Vanguard Onslaught, there is one in there that allows you to do the old like redeploy 3 units after you nose game first, which is brilliantly powerful, obviously. So if you have that for the rest of your Crusades, happy days.
Yeah.
I'll be redeploying my Crusher Stampede monsters in a few games' time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, you're not supposed to do that.
But I think in the context of Crusade, it's absolutely fine. It's like, these are obviously the characters and the heroes whose stories have been followed. So in the case of the Tyranids, that thing has adapted and evolved in that particular way, and now it has this physical trait.
Also, how cool is it, the idea that, again, like, I'm picking on Death Leaper because it's such an amazing model, but imagine having like a Death Leaper that's got that. You've got him to the end, right? He's Vanguard Invader. You've got him to the end of the invasion stage. He's got all the XP because he's always ending up in the deployment zone, and then you take him in the enemy deployment zone. You take him in your next battles. You run him with something like Crusher Stampede. Well, there's your narrative right there. He's been knocking about among the enemy for so long. He knows where they deploy. He knows where they are. He's using that intelligence as part of the hive mind, and now telling your big bugs where to go.
Yeah, he's holding up his big red flesh cape, waving it around.
He's doing his job.
like the matador. Like the matador he is.
That's why the Crusher Stampede are coming this way.
Just herding a load of Carnifex. It's like a scarier version of that bull run they do in Pamplona, but with Carnifexes. That would be awful.
Oh dear!
Imagine that through the streets of the Palace of Terror.
Oh god!
Oh good. On the subject of enhancements, it's probably worth noting that they are limited in Crusade more so than relics and stuff were in the previous one, because each additional one costs more requisition points than the last. So if you want to stack them up, it's harder and harder to do so. So they kind of thought of that.
Oh, that's good. That's good, though.
Yeah.
The
Crusade rules feel like they've had a lot more thought put into them than the previous version.
As is often the way with a lot of their mechanics.
Which leads nicely onto the bit that didn't. So the second stage of the invasion of the devouring world is the predation stage, sort of mid bugs or whatever. The requisition's pretty good. You can do it once per devoured world. You select one Endless Multitude unit, and they get to have the infiltrator keyword or special rule. So you can just have a big unit of termagants or whatever start in the middle of the board. That's pretty good, and it's fluffy. I like that. However, the second bit is, I think this is actually a mistake. This second bit here, the battle experience, you get extra experience for controlling objectives in no man's land with certain units. That makes sense. However, the list of units is as follows: Biovores, Exocrine, Haruspex, Hive Guard, Hive Tyrant, Pyrovores, Tyrannofex, Tyrant Guard, Warlord. Now, if you are a Tyranid veteran, you'll notice that all of those are things that come at the end in the consumption stage of the invasion. So why are they getting bonus experience here? And spoilers, that exact same list shows up in the consumption section. So I think they've literally copied and pasted it wrong.
Ah, okay, yes. That makes it sound like it's a mistake.
Yeah, just forgotten to change it. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. There are. I must admit, like as I say, great book overall, and like this is a good example of it. So it's worth talking about. There are some things in the Tyranid book which are like, you know, especially for, as Dan rightly says, for like people who play Tyranids a lot, who know the lore. There are some things that are like a bit weird. Like, so just to pick two off the top of my head, right? Raveners, right? Digging warrior form bugs, vermiform things. Not Vanguard Invader, right? Don't get any of that, which you would have thought the speedy, diggy guys kind of might. You know, maybe even the big ones, like the Morlock and the Trigon. I mean, I can kind of see maybe why they didn't, because it's quite powerful, but like, you know, the idea of them as the Vanguard Invader. But then also the other one, there's this Harvester, what's it called? Assimilation Swarm. That's a Harvester keyword that's, you know, in principle, really cool. It's like, you know, it's the stuff that's eating things, that's producing spores. That's got like 3 units that get the keyword, 3 or 4 units, I think, that get the keyword. And some of them make sense, like the Haruspex. But then the Pyrovore gets it, I guess, because he's eating stuff and turning it into you know, flaming acid. I don't know. It's like some of the choices are a little bit strange, right? So there are examples of that. So I think this is
the Pyrovore is Tyranid indigestion.
Yeah. He needs a Rennie, right? Fundamentally, is what he needs to help his or you know, that little fireman made out of the indigestion medicine they always used to have on the adverts that I won't name. But yeah, like I think it's one of those like little mistakes that maybe they have just copied and pasted stuff across.
Yeah. Sadly, because it's the Crusade section, I feel
we'll
like
keep an eye out for that potentially in the FAQ. Then
I feel like they probably won't look at it in the FAQ because it's Crusade, so they'll just sort of ignore that in favour of fixing things that are actually broken when they come up, if you know what I mean.
Well then, perhaps in your like local playgroup or whatever of your regular opponent, create a little short list of what is agreed on as the mid-stage creatures, which is probably basically anything that isn't included in the first list or the third list.
Yeah, basically. It's like
I don't know.
Warriors.
What would we get? You know what? Let's do it live. Yeah. What would you go for, Dan? What would you include? Warriors?
Yeah, it would definitely be warriors of the various sorts. I think I'd put Carnifexes in that bracket as well. I think they feel like they are sort of mid-tier bug
agreed.
these days. I think maybe the various snaky bugs, since they don't fit. Apparently, they're not
the
Vanguard organisms, and they don't fit at the end either. And
yes, agreed.
The big flyers, like the actual aircraft equivalent ones,
the Harpy and the Hive Crone. Yeah,
I think are they Vanguard invaders? I think they might be.
Oh,
the Harpy is the Harpy is a Vanguard invader. The Hive Crone, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
What about the new emissaries?
Yeah,
the assimilator.
Because really the predation stage is anything that's just meant to be like a battering ram that's like kind of, you know, is smashing apart the resistance. You've invaded, you've done your Vanguard invasion, you're now smashing apart the resistance with the objective that at your next stage you'll eat it all, right? But you need to get rid of it first. So even stuff like Tyrannofex, I mean Exocrines I can kind of see being, they're on this list, I can kind of see them being a predation stage because they are living artillery, they're just bombarding stuff.
Presumably all the psychic stuff. Your Neurotyrants, your Zoanthropes, your Meliceptors.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, it's not so easy to sneak in when you're a giant brain bug, but also you're not concentrating too much on eating anything either, because you don't have any... You probably don't have that big a stomach because it's all taken up by brain.
Probably Ripper swarms as well, although they are used for consumption. Probably Ripper swarms.
Rippers they don't fit in any of these lists because they're swarms and therefore they can't get experience points in Crusade.
Oh no, yeah, that's true. And I'm guessing spore mines can't as well. I think I read somewhere spore mines can't, which is sad to me because everyone loves a spore mine.
Amazing.
So, assuming that we created a little retconned list of things that should be in this detachment, then have we covered everything that, like, not detachment even, this stage of the invasion? Have we covered everything that they should, in theory, get or benefit from?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, like I say, the requisition is decent. The idea of getting points for being on No Man's Land objectives makes sense. It's just the list is wrong. And as mentioned, it is the list that you get experience for in the consumption stage, and those units in the consumption stage will get XP just for being alive, which is easy. But kind of makes sense because if you're eating stuff, you want to be alive at the end. Like, I guess that makes sense.
I mean, preferably. That's a terrible. That's a terrible Yelp review if you're not alive at the end of your meal.
I invaded this planet, ate all the biomass, and died. 1 star.
I thought you were going to say the terrible review was, well, I survived.
Yeah, the meal did not kill me, so, I'll take it, right?
Love it.
Cool. So then, Dan, I take it, has in some shape or form the concept of Crusade relics survived into 10th edition?
Yes.
Do we have anything that's like unique
Yes.
upgrades or unique enhancements?
Okay, I'll get to that shortly. Just to finish up the consumption stage, you get you can use a requisition to get extra XP on a character or monster unit that wasn't destroyed, which is quite cool. It fits again. They want to survive. And once you have completed the consumption stage, you then get to spend all of the biomass that you've accumulated on a section called Biogenesis, which is a list of things you can get, and it's essentially all the various things you can do to Crusades to get them better, but spending biomass instead of your requisition points. So you can get more point. You can increase your points limit. You can get more of the sort of enhancements and things like that. You can get more XP on your units. You can just straight get an extra requisition point, and or you can use the special Tyranid requisitions for free. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do, and some of that would result in you getting more experience points, which could lead us to Crusade relics. See what I did there? I linked for you.
That's a great segue. Smooth.
Yeah, I know, right? I didn't just read half a section of the book in 2 seconds. Yeah, so Crusade relics, I have mixed feelings. There are 2 Artificer relics, 2 Antiquity relics, and a Legendary relic, and I think they are the exact same relics from 9th edition, but obviously with different rules. Some of them are good. Some of them are a little bit disappointing. Luckily, the core book has lots of Crusade relics, so it doesn't matter that much. Like, this doesn't upset me as much as the mid-stage invasion thing did. So, notably,
they've got cool names though.
Yes,
to be fair,
the Spirit Leech Cortex. Oh, that's cool. That is the one that kind of replicates the old Doom of Malantai thing, where you do psychic damage and get wounds back. That's cool. Notably, it requires a Psyker unit with a psychic attack, which is precisely one model that can take this in the book. And that is the Neuro Tyrant. which kind of makes sense. That would work as a Doom equivalent. Does a bunch of psychic wounds and then gets wounds back. It's pretty cool. It also, when it does that, it increases the strength of its melee attacks, which don't really do anything.
It's
so
not so great for the Tyrant.
Whatever. But it's okay.
He can tickle your intercessors for a couple of times, right? He can tickle your intercessors.
They'll have a great time. Extra strong tickles.
Yeah.
So
God, it's like a very frightening version of Tickle Me Elmo.
Yeah. So the disappointing thing here is that the second Artificer relic, the Bale Mind Membrane, also only works on models with psychic weapons. So the two Artificer relics both go on only one model in the book. And that one in particular allows you to reroll to hit and to wound. And notably, the only psychic weapon you can put it on automatically hits. So I don't think they thought that one through very well.
Yeah, it's a flamer. No. Do you know what this suggests to me, which is interesting? Let's do some extrapolation. Let's do some conspiracy theorizing. This suggests to me that there were other models, perhaps at some point during the drafting of this book, that were intended to be psychic characters. Nero. I'm going to say Nero Tyrant.
Neurothroat.
I completely lost my train of thought. I'm looking at the model right now. Well, no, because he's just part of a zoanthrope unit.
He is now.
I mean the big lads. No, but I mean the.
Oh yes, they are
the Norn. The
they do have psychic weapons, but they are not characters, so they can't have the Crusade relics.
They're not characters. Yeah, so what I mean is, I wonder if this suggests a point in time at which there were more, they intended. Because I think people were surprised when this wasn't a character.
Yeah,
which kind of makes sense because you don't want to stick enhancements on it. But yeah, it suggests to me that at some point in the drafting there were more psychic characters.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like
presumably
it was.
Is the Neurothrope an actual unit sergeant, and it's not just a character that gets attached?
Yes,
to Zoanthropes.
Yeah, it doesn't exist as a data sheet now, so it's just it's a sergeant, as you say,
because that might have been the case. If originally it was something like your mech boy equivalent, where it's technically a character, it has leader, and it's clearly intended to always go with the unit it's supposed to go with.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting thinking about it. It suggests that the Crusade rules were kind of written alongside the rest of the Codex rather than afterwards, which. Good or bad? I don't know. It's a thing.
We'll have to see how it plays out in other codexes.
Yeah, quite. I'm just going to skip the antiquity relics and go to the legendary relic, because the legendary relic is good. This is the Norn Crown, and essentially what it does is that it gives you the Shadow and the Warp ability you can use once per game. Well, if you've got the Norn Crown, you can do it twice. That's pretty good.
It's like the chopper of the Great War for the Orcs. Here's this faction-wide ability that's a big one use per game thing. Here's a legendary Crusade relic that lets you do it twice per game.
Yep. But that's not all.
Staple.
It also
there's more.
It also increases the range of friendly synapse units. Synapse ability to 9 inches instead of 6. That's all good. The synapse units in your army. That is really good.
Army-wide. That's cracking. That is cracking, that one.
Isn't it? Having played it, trying to get everything within 6 of a synapse creature is sometimes a little bit tricky. If it's 9 on everything, and the thing with the Norn Crown doesn't even have to be out front. It could be that Neuro Tyrant hiding at the back somewhere, right? If he's collecting all the relics.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but then what use is he if he can't make use of his psychic attack with all those enhancements?
Oh yeah, good point.
So yeah, and then is there much else to it, or just as a quick side note now, are there battle traits?
Yes, there are. So there's a few bits I'd like to talk about very quickly. Well, we'll talk about requisitions in a bit. Battle battle traits, yes, we have 2 tables of battle traits. We like tables of battle traits. These are pretty good. I mean, always there's going to be some that are good for some units and some that aren't. It's the nature of it. But there's a table for normal Tyranid units and a table for Synapse units. So the normal ones get stuff like Strength Born of Hunger. Add 1 to the strength characteristic of melee weapons equipped by models in this unit. It's pretty good. Or Fleet of Claw. Each time you make an advance or charge roll for this unit, you can re-roll the result. These are all good. They're all sort of just makes them faster, bigger, tougher, stronger. The kind of things you'd expect from your regular bugs. And then the Synapse unit one has some interesting stuff. Some of which is kind of a bit niche, but some of it's quite cool. You can... Well, there's one called Unfathomable Terror. It basically allows you to force an enemy unit within 6 inches to take a leadership test at a -1. And if they fail, you reduce their move characteristic. And they cannot be selected to advance. So you can kind of like tie stuff in place with your Synapse units.
Oh, so that's
it's basically it's basically like the Synapse abilities are all kind of like what would have been psychic powers in previous versions. This like giving extra abilities to them. So it's quite cool. There's that sort of stuff. And ones that are just like +1 toughness or whatever, which is obviously going to be good as well. Yep, so kind of thematic selection of battle traits. Obviously, they don't replace the ones in the book. You can have them as well. So you can have a whole load of different things on your Tyranids. It's pretty cool. The flip side of that, of course, is the battle scars. In 9th edition, we saw that not every book had them, but Tyranids did, and they do again here. And it's the same split. There's battle scars for Synapse units and battle scars for non-Synapse units. Similarly, the non-Synapse ones kind of interact with... they kind of mimic the core ones, really. There's one that means you can't use stratagems on them. One that means like they have to charge the closest nearest enemy, that kind of stuff. Basically, if you have a battle scar on a non-Synapse unit, they go all bestial and feral and don't act the way you want necessarily, which is quite cool. Whereas the Synapse ones, interestingly, they basically lose their various Synapse abilities.
Okay.
The most fun one is Casts No Shadow, which means the Synapse creature is affected by your Shadow of the Warp ability, so you have to take a battle shock test as well on that unit.
Oh man,
That is quite fun.
Like the idea of a Tyranid. Oh, I'm really scary. Oh, scary.
Yes, I've got a headache.
Both of those tables for the battle scars have 4 results, and then 5 or 6 is roll on the core battle scar tables in the Crusade books. So you can just choose to roll on this, and then you might get one of the in the book ones. It's no problem there. Again, kind of more results, not replacing the things in the core book, which is good.
Yeah, nice.
So the last bit, well, not quite the last bit. The last bit I sort of want to seriously talk about is the requisitions, because this is kind of like the bit that has that feeling of cycling through units and replacing them with, like, you know, you burn your biomass and make more. It kind of has a nice feel to it that kind of sets the Tyranid Crusade apart from the others a bit. There is, as mentioned before, there's one that lets you take an additional agenda. Fair enough. But the other 3 all sort of let you swap around your configuration within your Crusade. There's There's one that lets you pick a Tyranid character and swap their Crusade relic for a different Crusade relic, which is quite cool because then, for instance, you could have a legendary character and swap all their relics for legendary ones, which would be a bit wild. But it does mean if you have a relic you don't like, you can swap it for something else. If you have a relic that's like affects a weapon, that means you can't do a weapon enhancement on it, you could swap it for something else, and then you could do the weapon enhancement. There's interesting options there, and it just feels quite sort of fluffy. And then we've got two that kind of affect the units and the various things they have. There is Respawn Warrior Organisms that allows you to pick a Tyranid unit from your order of battle that has no battle scars. It loses all of its battle traits, and you just select a new battle trait for each one it lost. So basically you can just completely change the way that unit is set up. All of its experience gets turned into something else.
That's pretty...
Almost like it's a completely different unit.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like,
it's quite cool.
Into that like regen idea.
Yes, it's the ability to respec on the fly.
Exactly. It's it's very Tyranids. It's an aspect of Tyranids that has been kind of ignored through most of the previous editions, but in 9th edition they started to play into it a bit more.
and then they nerfed it.
Yes, and then they took it away. Whatever. The final one is synaptic bioregenesis, which means you can... this is very interesting. You can select a synapse unit from your order of battle and replace it with a new synapse unit. You cannot purchase this requisition if it would make you go over your tail points, blah, blah, blah. The newly added synapse unit starts with the same number of experience points as the unit it replaced and immediately gains the appropriate number of battle honors for its rank. So you literally go, that unit of Zoanthropes, they're a Hive Tyrant now with the same experience points or whatever. So you literally just melt them down, make a new thing.
Yeah, this is the sort of traditional captain becomes a dreadnought or a Farseer becomes a Wraithlord sort of equivalent upgrade, but because it's Tyranids, it's literally just, we're going to turn any piece of biology into this other piece of biology, but it retains its sentience. So it's just been smushed up into goo and kept alive and then reconstituted.
At one moment, my wife has walked in and has an important message for us.
Nerd!
Thank you.
Nudes!
We always get that at the start of the recording normally, but if she's been out, then she's taken her first opportunity to give us that important public announcement. So it really is sort of embracing the adaptability and changing nature of the Tyranid army in these Crusade rules as a whole, from the whole concept of moving through stage of invasion to completion and consumption, right through to the actual resources and rewards and upgrades, all been very malleable and changeable as your Crusade goes on, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly as I say, it's got a core, a very strong core concept.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, thank you, Dan, for taking us through all of that and all of the Tyranids on Crusade, and hopefully going to be a sort of early insight into the sort of things we can expect from the other factions in Crusade going forward in 10th edition.
Yeah, I think we'll see a mix of the 9th edition stuff updated, plus some new things. Speaking of new things, there's one little tiny bit at the end that I just wanted to mention, and that's Crusade badges, which doesn't actually do anything. It's literally just sort of achievements for playing Crusade. There's a Vanguard Tendril one, which you get if you successfully devour one world and win at least 2 battles. There's a Monstrous Tendril, which is you have to devour 3 different types of world and win 6 battles, and All-Consuming Tendril, which is basically you've completed Codex Tyranids, You devoured 5 different worlds, including at least one of each type. You've won at least 10 battles. You've got a legendary character, and you've got the Norn Crown relic.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that really is like ticking all the boxes and being the whole well done, you completed Crusade sort of scenario.
Completed it, mate. Completed the Codex. Got my gold badge. I am an all-consuming tendril. There is nothing that you can do about it.
Well, yeah. I think with that, we have perhaps also come to the end of and completed our podcast for tonight, I think.
Yeah, it's been a pretty comprehensive overview. I think the book's cool. I think the Crusade rules in particular give you that. I think Dan's done a great job of like where they get the flavour, and we've said where they've got a few things probably in our view maybe a little bit wrong, but overall, if you wanted to run like if you really wanted to be like, listen, this is Hive Fleet Jeff, and Hive Fleet Jeff is going to go and become bigger than Leviathan, and we are going to do a Crusade campaign. You could really have some very thematic games with this, which I think is great.
Absolutely. And you'd have this Crusade that progresses over time. Units would go in and out of favour depending on how strong they get, and in the end you'd have like a few core units that are really strong, and then a whole load of other sort of chaff units with 1 or 2 upgrades. And it'd be really cool.
Which is very Tyranidy, right? It's very Tyranidy. That's what you have. You have your core of your army with your super strong guys, and then the rest of it is just, mulch on legs that's going to turn you into more mulch on legs, right? That's the point.
Yeah. Like, I don't need my unit of 20 termagants to be a legendary unit in Crusade.
Wearing the Norn crown, bizarrely.
Yeah.
Despite not being a character or a psyker. We're giving it to a termagant, because why not?
I mean, they need all the enhancements they can get for those psychic attacks that they have.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh.
But yeah, thank you very much, Dan, for going through all the Tyranids stuff with us. Thank you, Adam, for coming and joining us tonight, and also lending your contributions to the Hive Mind.
None of which are at all useful.
They are very entertaining.
Well, I try, but I am that slightly useless, Nero tyrant that's being given a relic that it can't use, I think.
But he's very proud of it.
Yes, yeah. No. Honestly, though, thank you for having me on. It's been really fun chatting through the book tonight and chatting through Crusade, and yeah, it's as I say. I think I said at the start. I'll say it again. I'll repeat myself. I think it's a good time to be a bug player, whether you are doing, whether you're playing your match play or whether you are doing Crusade. And I think if you haven't checked out Crusade, give it a go. I did it in 9th. I had a go in 9th. And I think it did suffer from what, certainly Dan alluded to with the whole, you just load up all your XP on one dude that becomes impossible to kill. I think the classic one we always joked about was like a Space Marine captain. It was like, what's his fluff? Oh yeah, he's really good at everything. That's what he does. And it's like that's fine. Do what you want. But like this, certainly the Tyranid one does lean you more towards, as we've said, like actually changing the units, actually kind of moving the swarm around and playing about with it. So I think let's see what they do with Space Marines. Let's see what they do with other codexes that come out, just because then you've got other people playing with their own rules as well. But actually, it's probably a really good time to get a Crusade going and actually really lean into it as well.
Yeah,
I
the final agree. Relevant point on that is all the people who were saying that in 10th edition they've lost a lot of the sort of fluff and the narrative behind their armies with the changes to how detachments work, that kind of stuff. Hey, it's all here. It's in Crusade. That's where it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's always hiding in the places that nobody ever thinks to look, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here with the Narrative Wargamer Podcast.
Yeah.
To help people find where all the little hidden gems are within the edition and their codexes, and it's great. It's there.
Well, You know what? Talking of hidden gems and narrative. Sorry, I know we're trying to round up. But I will just say, even if you don't do Crusade, please read the Crusade section because there is some cracking lore in here. Like next to the Crusade relics that Dan was talking through earlier, there is I won't read it because go and check it out. But there is a really cool story about like a Chaos Space Hulk and what happens when Tyranids get into a Chaos Space Hulk with demons on it. And how that all goes for everybody involved and everyone that has to experience it. So go and check it out. It's really cool.
We are big fans here of crazy and interesting lore tidbits. We have whole quizzes dedicated to them. So yeah. We definitely love finding all those fun little things in the books.
Sweet.
So for everybody listening and watching at home, one last time, where can people find you, Adam?
So I am at ADR Wargaming on Instagram. That's probably the best place to find me these days. I'm also a moderator on War Hipster, on the YouTube channel War Hipster, run by my friend Josh, who is the War Hipster. So I'm usually in the chat there if he's streaming, or indeed appearing in Tale of Many War Hipsters, his sort of painting a video that we do once a month, where people sort of are giving in their painting models, and we sort of talk about them, generally celebrate them, because my God, you're all good at painting. I will say that's the one thing that I get from that. But yeah, you can find me there. You can find me on the Conclave podcast. We do have an Instagram at the Conclave 40k, but I'll be honest, I haven't been keeping it updated, so probably best to message me on at ADR Wargaming on Instagram if you have thoughts, comments, feelings, anything you want to talk about, because I love talking about the Warhams in all of its glorious forms.
And Dan, how about you?
If you go on your social media of choice and type in Red Tooth or Red_Tooth, you'll probably find me.
You're usually about somewhere on there, so yeah. Instagrams, Facebooks, your own blogs. You have your own one of those as well, don't you? Which didn't I get a shout out recently for something that you've done some coverage on?
Yeah, I've got a blog. I can't remember.
Fair enough. Yeah, and then for myself, as always, I am at Narrative Wargamer on most platforms. Again, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Things are going well now on YouTube, and I'm enjoying what I'm getting to put out. And and make sure you do like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, because there will be more stuff coming out from us in the near future, as always. So thank you again, guys, for coming and joining me tonight, and I'm sure Adam might see you again on a future episode sometime.
Definitely, man, definitely.
Until next time, guys, this has been the Narrative Wargamer Podcast, helping you to discover more ways to play 40k.